many believe, that the only solution to this conflict is what we call a two-state solution. The state of Israel already exists, the creation of the state of Palestine next to the state of Israel, where you have two nations for two peoples, two states for two peoples. I still believe it's the only solution simply because of the idea of nationalism. The Jewish people have dreamt for millennia of having a state of their own, and they have it right now, and they will not share it with anyone else. It is a state of the Jewish people, of course, with equal rights to its citizens, but this is the very raison d'etre for Israel. And for the Palestinians, the Palestinian national movement is all about having a Palestinian state. And the only way that you can meet these two legitimate national aspirations is through a two-state solution. So on the one hand, we know what the solution is. On the other hand, because of politics, and I will go into this in a bit more detail, because of politics, today a two-state solution is not possible. Not because of the issues themselves. We both were negotiators, and we do know that there are policy solutions to most of these issues, but mainly because of the politics. Israel, as many of you who follow the issue know, has been basically paralyzed over this year. 2 elections, most likely a third one. David can spend hours talking about this, probably will. Sorry. And the Palestinians face their own political challenges. The Palestinian body politic today is divided. Hamas, a terrorist organization in charge of the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian Authority, the PLO, Fatah, interchangeable for our purposes here, are in charge of the West Bank. These two will not reconcile. We can go into this more in the Q&A, but simply I just don't see them reconciling. Divided Palestinian political system, and more than that, a Palestinian political system that faces a serious challenge of legitimacy. If you look at public opinion polls today, 80% of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza believe that their governments are corrupt. Think of this. 4 out of 5 Palestinians you will meet believe they are governed by thieves. How can you trust a thief to negotiate something like the right of return or Jerusalem or these key issues? 70% of the Palestinians want the president, Mahmoud Abbas, to resign. And Abbas himself, in his mid-80s, let's say not a paragon of healthy living, no clear successor, and Palestinian politics is today at the macro level, at the higher level, is paralyzed by the kind of succession dynamic. In this kind of environment, making the kind of compromises you need for a peace deal, for what we call a permanent status agreement, a deal to end the conflict, to resolve issues of Jerusalem, refugees, borders, key issues that define the very nature of both societies, is simply unthinkable. So on the one hand, we know what the solution is and we need the solution. On the other hand, there is no way to reach the solution. So far, the way that the reality has dealt with this is basically to do nothing. But as we have learned from 10 years of doing nothing comes with a price. And the price is today, most Palestinians and most Israelis do not believe that peace is possible, ever. Most Palestinians and most Israelis strongly believe that the impossibility of peace is because the other side is not interested in peace. And people like myself and like David and the many Palestinians and Israelis who want peace, we find ourselves very hard-pressed to point to any developments in recent years to show our public that no, we have partners on the other side. So we know the solution, we can't get the solution, we have paralysis. The paralysis creates disbelief, lack of trust, and it's creating a scenario where most people are moving away from the idea of a two-state solution. And I see today a regrowth of the maximalist positions that many of us grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Solutions and a narrative on both sides that basically says the only solution to this conflict is if my side wins completely, and the other side capitulates, and that's how we can get peace. Needless to say, this is not a particularly healthy state of affair, nor is it one that will create peace. So between the impossibility of a deal, on the one hand, and the risks of doing nothing, the question that occupies many of us today is what can you do in this, in between these two? And here, I'm sorry to, maybe I will disappoint you, because I have good news. Usually when we talk about this issue, it's always bad news and bad news. There is some good news here. Below the radar screen, over the last few years, there has been tremendous degree of security cooperation between Palestinians and Israelis. Security cooperation not born out of a sense of, generosity or magnanimity or whatnot. Security cooperation that is built on the foundation of self-interest. The Israelis, they know that they need the Palestinian security forces in the West Bank to help control the situation. And the Palestinian security forces understand that terrorism, whether coming from Hamas or from the Fatah itself, is antithetical to the very interest of the Palestinian people and the survival of the Palestinian Authority. This has created security coordination. I remember I was involved in the early stages. We looked at it in a very transactional way. This is what you need, this is what I need, this is what we're going to do. With time though, this transactional dynamic has created a very virtuous dynamic. Today, and for many of you this might be counterintuitive and a surprise, today most of the Israeli, the strongest advocate for Palestinian interest in the Israeli system are the IDF. The IDF are the Israeli military. It's not because the IDF, and any of you who's up to the IDF will know that what I'm going to say is true. It's not because they are suddenly become these soft, lovey-dovey, easy people. No. They have learned through experience with their counterparts that they have Palestinian counterparts that are reliable. They have partners on the other side, and the security forces, and vice versa. This has created a degree of security, a degree of stability, and a degree of mutual trust that has made it possible today to do some practical steps on the ground to the benefits of both publics. Today, when you talk to IDF generals, they will probably bore the living daylights out of you, listing the kind of projects that they think can be doable in the West Bank. Whether these are economic projects, whether these are projects that entail giving the Palestinian Authority more jurisdiction, whether these are projects that would allow Palestinians to build more of the West Bank. They do it out of a belief, on the one hand, that they have partners, and out of the understanding that if there is no progress, the publics will become more disenchanted, and this disenchantment will ultimately breed violence and instability. So today, I believe that there is a lot that can be done, a lot of practical things that can be done, that certainly will not resolve the conflict. The conflict can only be resolved in negotiations. Something of the magnitude of the future of Jerusalem, the fate of the refugees, etc., cannot be done unless you have big political negotiations. But today, there is a space for practical things on the ground, and these are things which are obviously good in their own right. But beyond being good in their own right, I think they can also start reversing a dynamic. As I mentioned earlier, today I find one of the most discouraging and dangerous dynamics is the lack of trust between the two publics. Today, if you ask a Palestinian, and actually pollsters have done this repeatedly, do you want peace? Do you believe in a two-state solution? A majority will tell you yes. You ask them question number 2. Do you believe that the Israelis want peace? Of course not. Question number 3. Do you think peace is possible? Nah, it's not. We want it, they don't want it, it's not going to happen, it's their fault. And as I mentioned, it is because of the fact that while my generation has seen how the Israelis are capable of doing positive steps, today's generation, born during the Intifada, during the period of conflict, have seen nothing good from the Israelis. I've only seen an Israeli as a soldier on a checkpoint. Not a very endearing experience. And of course, the Israelis have their own experiences which are very negative with the Palestinians. These kinds of small steps would allow someone like myself, people who are calling for peace among the Palestinians, to say, look, the Israelis can be partners in the right conditions. It allows Israelis to go to their own skeptical public and say, look, we're testing the Palestinians in these small steps, and they can be reliable security partners for us. So today, this is the path, I believe. It's not a very compelling path. I don't expect anyone to leave this room feeling excited and going for a demonstration that calls for small steps. It's not the kind of thing that will engage the imagination of leaders. Leaders like to first, headlines and Nobel Prizes and whatnot. Certainly, this is not going to give them any of the above. However, these are the kind of steps I believe which are A, doable, B, will reverse the dynamic, and will show a key point. a key point that one of the reasons why I see so many people, whether individuals, governments, states, politicians, moving away from this conflict, is that there's a narrative today that this is a conflict of failure. Everything you try to do in this conflict fails. I think these small steps can create a narrative that success is possible. And I think today we need to show hope and to show that success is a possibility. Otherwise, I see more people moving away from engagement in this conflict and leaving it, frankly, to the more shrill, more divisive kind of voices that Laura mentioned in the beginning. Now, all I said, I believe, is extremely fascinating and useful if you're the Secretary of State, if you're the President of the United States, if you're the ambassador to this, to that. Sure, what does it mean for us? I think it means, taking the logic, I think there is much that we can learn from that. I think a lot of the negative environment that we see today is a result of a sense of betrayal, a result of a sense of failure. So many people who had dreams, who had expectations, who had excitement, have failed. And as a result, they lash out, creating what we see today, creating this very divisive, this very negative environment. Today, it's much easier when you talk about this conflict, if you're a Duke student or whatnot, rather than to go through the intricacies and the self-reflection needed to look at why we failed. It's very easy to say, oh, we failed for a very obvious reason. It's because of you. And here are 100 examples from the 10 years to show that you are incapable of doing anything positive. The problem with this kind of narrative is that, again, it pushes people away. The problem with this kind of narrative, it doesn't confine itself to the discussions in Duke or in this synagogue or in that mosque. These kinds of conversations create a general, national kind of lack of interest in engaging this. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to members of Congress who would privately say, yeah, what you're saying makes sense. However, we don't want to touch this issue. Nothing good comes out of touching this issue. The negative dynamics create a sense that leaders are unwilling to engage, politicians, etc., are unwilling to engage this issue because they believe nothing good will come out of this issue. It creates, as well, a sense of pressure against people of goodwill, those who identify with the Palestinians and Israelis, who want to do the right thing, but feel that if you do the right thing, you are going against the tide, and that your own public and your own community will be working against you. We believe, and the reason David and I have done, as Laura said, so many of these conversations, we believe, first of all, the two nations, the two peoples, have no choice but to resolve the conflict. If we could have erased the other side, we would have done it a long time ago. The two sides are blessed or cursed, it depends on how you look at it, of living together. And unless you make a resolution, you're only consigned to further conflict and bloodshed. And by extension, for those of us here who want to engage in this divisive nature, all we do is we contribute to the continuation of this conflict. All we do is to contribute to the continuation of bloodshed and of the misery that comes with it. What we try to do is to show that actually, first of all, the issues are resolvable. Today we were focusing on small steps. We could shift the conversation and talk about how you resolve the big issues. These are resolvable. We want to show that there are resolutions. We want to show that there is a way forward. And what we want to show most of all, two individuals from extremely different backgrounds. An Arab immigrant, an American Jew. We worked in very different environments. I worked for the Palestinian Authority, David works for the US government. Yet, it is possible to have a conversation, a normal, resolution-oriented conversation. To many of you, this will sound, what's the big deal? In many campuses that I go to, I often get students that come to me after that and say, first time that we've seen actually an Arab and a Jew have a conversation without screaming at one another. It is tragic, yet it does reflect, sadly, the experience of many. So I believe that for all of us, whether we are students, whether we are people who are figures of authority, unless we stand up now and to show that it is possible to have this kind of conversation, unless we stand up and show that those of us, with whatever weight that we hold in our own communities, are willing to give cover for those who are younger ones, who are willing to engage in this, I fear that we are losing a generation. And I fear that we are going in a situation where you'll have a generation that is almost consigned to make the exact same mistakes that our generation made, to ultimately reach the same conclusion, the conclusion that the other side is there to stay, and the only way we can live a normal life is to live together. So with this, I hope that we can at least show that competition is possible. We hope at least to show that there is a way beyond divisiveness. And I want to thank you for your time, and I'm